On a dark street corner, as a disabled black saxophonist is packing up to head home, he hears a cry from a nearby alley. Limping toward the sound, he finds a frightened white boy. Without hesitation, and despite the danger, he throws himself into the fight to save the boy from two men who are bullying him. What he doesn't know is that this brave act will set off a chain of events that will change his future forever. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thoughts. It was just past 9:00 p.m. on Bourbon Street, New Orleans, and the night had finally hit its rhythm. Tourists drifted like waves through the neon haze, their laughter and drunken chants weaving through the honking cars, sizzling grease from food trucks, and the clinking of glasses behind bar windows. The street was loud, chaotic, full of color and motion. Yet amidst all of it, one sound rose above the noise like a steady heartbeat trying to be heard through a storm. The slow, smoky cry of a saxophone. Jerome Carter sat at the corner of Dauphine and Toulouse, his thin frame hunched slightly forward on a foldable metal stool, with one leg shorter than the others, making it rock ever so slightly with every breath he took. His left foot was braced awkwardly against the sidewalk, while his right leg, stiff and wrapped in a faded orthopedic support brace, stuck out with a slight tremble every time he leaned in too hard. The accident 5 years ago had left him with permanent nerve damage, and most nights it burned so bad he'd scream in his sleep if he was lucky enough to find somewhere safe to close his eyes. His fingers, however, were still magic. He wore a frayed navy peacoat, 2 sizes too big, buttoned to the neck, with gloves that had holes at the fingertips. His hands were rough, calloused from years of gripping brass, yet when they danced across the saxophone there was a gentleness in them, like he was holding the last delicate thing left in the world. A small black case lay open at his feet. Inside it, 4 crumpled $1 bills, 2 quarters, a pack of crushed menthols, and a folded picture of his father. His old man in full military uniform holding a young Jerome beside a shiny alto saxophone, the same saxophone now pressed against Jerome's lips. The music he played that night wasn't happy. It wasn't made for dancing or tipping. It was a slow, aching melody with notes that stretched too long, dipped too deep, and carried too much truth. You could feel the grit of the pavement in every note, the weight of lost chances in every pause. It sounded like someone calling out into the night, not expecting an answer, but blowing anyway. Because that's all they had left. And, strangely, people stopped. First, a middle-aged woman in a red coat, holding a styrofoam cup of hot gumbo. Then a young man with AirPods dangling from his neck, nodding slowly. Then 2 tourists, clearly drunk, holding hands but quiet now, watching him play like they'd stumbled into a moment too intimate to interrupt. The music began to pull a little crowd together. No one spoke, they just listened. Even the nearby bars dimmed in comparison, their electronic bass lines paling next to Jerome's raw, breathing soul. Jerome didn't notice them all. He was inside the song. Eyes closed, brow furrowed, swaying gently, as if every note took something from him and gave something back. His foot tapped irregularly, not to a beat, but to the twitch in his leg that always flared when the pain kicked in. He pushed through. The song demanded it. Then came the voice, harsh, flat, cutting through the melody like a dull knife through silk. "Hey, you, pack it up, this ain't your corner." Jerome opened his eyes slowly, his breath catching as the saxophone gave a final groan and fell silent. The crowd turned their heads as the officer stepped into view. White, mid-40s, square-jawed, sunglasses still on despite the darkness. The kind of man who walked like every sidewalk was his property and everyone else was trespassing. He wore the badge on his chest like a warning, not a responsibility. "I'm just playing, officer," Jerome said calmly, wiping the mouthpiece and blinking against the sweat on his brow. "You got a permit?" the cop barked, already shaking his head. "You got a performance license from the city?" Jerome gestured toward the open case. "Just trying to make enough for dinner, that's all. Folks don't seem to mind." The officer stepped closer, kicking the edge of the case closed with the toe of his boot, the coins clinking sharply as they bounced. The picture of Jerome's father fluttered out like a leaf and landed face up on the concrete. I said, pack it up. People are trying to walk through. You're obstructing a public pathway, causing disturbance. Last warning. Jerome's jaw tensed. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from exhaustion and frustration. This wasn't the first time. It wasn't even the third this month. He lowered his head, picked up the picture gently, and folded the case shut with quiet hands. The small crowd started to disperse like smoke in wind, some muttering, some casting apologetic glances, most just walking away. As he began to limp down the street, pushing his cart with the saxophone case tied to it by old rope, Jerome didn't look back. His leg hurt like hell. His pride hurt worse. He had just given everything he had into that music, his soul laid bare, and the only thing he got in return was a boot and a badge telling him he didn't belong. And yet, as he turned down a side alley toward his usual sleeping spot behind a closed jazz bar, Jerome didn't curse, didn't scream. He simply muttered under his breath, with a tired smile curling at the edge of his lip, "One day, someday, someone's gonna listen long enough." The alley was quiet now. The neon glow faded behind him, but up ahead, just before he reached the loading dock, he heard something. A thud, then a scuffle, then a muffled cry. Jerome froze. That wasn't a drunk, that wasn't a raccoon in the trash. It was a voice, a small one, a child's voice. And just like that, Jerome Carter forgot the pain in his leg, forgot the boot in his back, forgot everything, except the sound of someone in trouble. He let go of the cart and stepped forward, limping faster than his leg should have allowed. Jerome's fingers clenched instinctively as he stepped farther into the alleyway, the cool night air tightening around his chest like a warning. The dim yellow light of a flickering overhead lamp barely reached the concrete wall, casting long, distorted shadows that moved like predators in the dark. The sound he'd heard, sharp, human, scared, came again, this time clearer. A single, choked-out cry. "Let go of me." Jerome's heart kicked in his chest. He could make out the forms now. Two men, young, jittery, built like alley rats, had backed a small boy into the wall, one with a hand over the kid's mouth, the other rifling through the boy's coat. The boy was no older than 12, white, light brown hair falling over his forehead, sneakers untied, backpack halfway off his shoulder. He was fighting, squirming, but clearly outmatched. Jerome didn't have time to think. His leg was already aching from the walk, still sore from being forced to leave the corner. His whole body screamed against motion, but his hands tightened around the saxophone like it was a weapon, and with a rough inhale through clenched teeth, he stepped forward into the pool of light. "Hey," he shouted, voice sharp like brass against the night. "Let the boy go." The two men turned, startled. One stepped forward immediately, arms up in mock surrender. "Ain't none of your business, old man," the taller one sneered, eyes flicking from Jerome's limp to the saxophone in his grip. "Keep walking, or we'll make you crawl." Jerome didn't move. He could feel his heartbeat thudding in his ears, faster now, heavier, louder than the street noise behind him. He took a slow step forward. The uneven weight shifted into his bad leg, and pain shot up through his hip like lightning. He gritted his teeth, not showing it. His hands never trembled. "Let the boy go," he repeated, lower this time, firm. The kid's eyes, wide, frantic, locked with Jerome's. And in that second Jerome saw fear, yes, but also something else, something he knew well. Helplessness. The kind that sat with you long after the bruises faded. The kind that buried music under silence. The shorter guy lunged. Jerome swung the saxophone hard. The brass caught the man's arm with a loud, hollow clang, sending him stumbling into the dumpster. Jerome didn't wait. He shouted to the boy, "Run!" The kid didn't hesitate. He bolted, slipping past Jerome and disappearing down the alley. But the taller one came fast. Jerome turned too slow. His leg couldn't pivot quick enough, and a fist connected with the side of his head. Stars exploded behind his eyes. He staggered backward, foot catching on a loose piece of asphalt. Another blow came, this one to his gut, stealing the air from his lungs. He swung again, blindly, the saxophone glancing off a shoulder. Then the world tilted. A final shove sent Jerome crashing down, his back slamming into the side of the dumpster, the metal unforgiving. His head struck the concrete hard. He heard the echo of it ring through the alley, louder than any note he'd ever played. Then everything began to fade. The last thing he heard, before the cold pulled him under, was the sound of footsteps running, not away, toward him. Lighter. Then a boy's voice, cracking with panic. "Somebody help, please, he's hurt. He saved me." And Jerome Carter, musician of Bourbon Street, man with a limp and a song nobody seemed to hear, finally let go and fell into the dark. There was a beeping sound. Soft, steady, rhythmic, nothing like the thumping bass lines of Bourbon Street or the coarse clatter of a city that never quite learned how to whisper. This sound was clean, sterile, mechanical. And it was the first thing Jerome Carter became aware of as he clawed his way back to consciousness. Then came the light. Too white, too harsh. It slipped under his eyelids and dragged him upward with it. His head throbbed in dull pulses, as if someone were banging gently on the inside of his skull with a rubber mallet. His throat was dry, his leg, his damn leg, burned. He winced, tried to move, and felt the pull of plastic tubing on his arm. Something beeped faster, a machine, maybe two. He turned his head, slowly groaning under his breath. The ceiling above him was made of plain, square tiles, too clean to be a shelter, too bright to be a friend. Faded. A hospital. "Kedi," a voice whispered from somewhere beside him, soft, high-pitched. A boy's voice. Jerome blinked through the haze, focusing slowly until the face came into view. It was the kid. The same boy from the alley, pale skin, sandy blonde hair, a scrape on his cheek, and big green eyes filled with something between guilt and relief. He was sitting in a plastic chair next to the hospital bed, knees pulled up against his chest, wearing an oversized hoodie that nearly swallowed him whole. The boy leaned forward, clutching a juice box like it was the only thing keeping his hands from shaking. Jerome opened his mouth to speak, but managed only a hoarse grunt. The boy beat him to it. "They said you'd be okay. That you were lucky. You hit your head bad, but you didn't crack your skull or anything." He paused, then added in a rush, "You saved me. If you hadn't come, they would have—" His voice caught in his throat. Jerome coughed. You all right?" The boy nodded quickly. "Yeah, my name's Noah. I'm 12. My dad's... He's coming." He was freaking out. Like, really freaking out. Jerome shut his eyes for a moment. Everything was too bright, too fast, but the pieces were sliding into place. He remembered the saxophone in his hands, the blow to the head, the pain in his back, then this kid's voice calling for help, shouting for someone, anyone. He opened his eyes again, looked straight at Noah. "You followed me," Jerome murmured, voice scratchy but steady. "Back there, in the alley." "Why?" Noah hesitated. Then he looked down at his juice box like it held the answer. "I saw you," he said quietly. "Last night, on Bourbon. You were playing, and I don't know why, but I couldn't stop listening. My mom and dad were fighting at the restaurant. Again, we were supposed to eat dinner with some senator guy. I told them I was going to the bathroom, and I left." Jerome stared at him, blinking. "I heard your music," Noah continued. "I followed it, sat on the curb. It made me feel like I was somewhere else, like maybe I wasn't invisible anymore." Just then the door opened. A tall man entered the room with a fast, heavy stride that stopped abruptly when he saw Jerome conscious. He was dressed in a sharp charcoal gray suit, no tie, salt and pepper hair slicked back with precision. His face was clean-shaven, handsome, but drawn tight with tension. He looked like someone used to control, someone who didn't like loose ends. His eyes locked on Jerome, sharp, calculating, then softened just slightly. "Noah, go wait outside," the man said firmly. "But, Noah." The man's tone left no room for argument. The boy stood up slowly, cast one more look at Jerome, then shuffled out, closing the door gently behind him. Silence filled the room for a beat. Then the man stepped forward and extended a hand. "I'm Roger Whitmore," he said. "Noah's father." Jerome. Jerome didn't take the hand right away. He just looked at it, then at the man's face. Roger slowly withdrew the gesture. "I wanted to come sooner," Roger said, clearing his throat. "But they weren't sure when you'd wake up. Noah, he hasn't stopped talking about you since last night." Jerome's voice was lower now, rougher. "Didn't exactly expect to wake up in a hospital bed. Thought maybe I'd be under one." Roger exhaled sharply. "Look, I'm not great at this kind of thing. I wanted to say thank you. You saved my son. And I don't even know your name." "Jerome," he answered. "Jerome Carter?" Roger nodded. "Well, Mr. Carter, I owe you more than I can express." There was another pause, but this one felt heavier. Roger's eyes flicked to the monitor beside the bed, then to the worn saxophone case propped up in the corner. "A nurse must have brought it in." "Was that yours?" Roger asked, gesturing slightly. Jerome turned his head. "Yeah, it's still yours if it's all busted up." Roger didn't smile, but something behind his eyes shifted. Like he saw more than he expected, like maybe, just maybe, he heard something in Jerome's tone he didn't quite know how to respond to. "Noah said he heard you play. That your music stopped him from running away farther, that it made him feel safe." Jerome gave a slight shrug, lips curling just barely. "Guess the street's got better acoustics than I thought." Roger stared at him for a moment. "You ever play professionally?" Jerome looked him straight in the eye. "Used to, Juilliard. Left before I finished. Life happened." Roger didn't press. But in his silence, something settled. An understanding, maybe even a bit of respect. And just before he turned to leave, Roger glanced at the saxophone case once more. "Well, life's strange, Mr. Carter. Sometimes it brings the right melody at the most unexpected time." And with that, he walked out, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Jerome stood outside the polished glass doors of the Willow Lounge, his worn saxophone case hanging loosely from one hand, his breath fogging in the cool New Orleans night. His reflection in the door showed a man who didn't belong. Dark skin, crumpled second-hand jacket, a limp he couldn't hide no matter how tall he tried to stand. Inside, warm golden lights glowed over marble floors, polished brass railings, and a crowd of people who had never missed a meal in their lives. He shifted his weight onto his good leg, sucking in a long breath, the faint ache in his bad leg reminding him of every mile he had walked just to survive. Behind him, a sleek black SUV idled, Roger Whitmore sitting inside, watching, waiting. He hadn't said much when he offered Jerome the chance. Just a tight nod, and the words, "Come play, if you still can." Jerome swallowed his pride, squared his shoulders, and pushed open the heavy door. Inside, the lounge buzzed with muted conversations, laughter wrapped in silk and money. Waiters in crisp white shirts floated between small round tables, carrying silver trays of champagne and oysters. A small stage sat in the corner, bare, cold, unforgiving, lit by a single overhead spotlight like an interrogation room in a crime drama. At the far end of the room, Roger stood with a cluster of well-dressed men and women, their watches gleaming under the lights, their smiles tight and practiced. Jerome caught the briefest glimpse of Noah peeking out from behind a velvet curtain near the bar, giving a tiny thumbs up before ducking out of sight. Jerome limped toward the stage, each step heavy, his heart pounding harder than the music he used to dream of playing. As he climbed the 2 short steps up to the platform, a few heads turned. Murmured whispers rippled through the crowd. "Who's he? Roger must be losing it. Looks like he dragged him off the street." Jerome heard every word, let it slide over him like rain off old leather. He set the battered saxophone case down with a soft thud, knelt slowly, wincing as his knee barked in protest, and opened it. Inside, his sax gleamed dully under the lights, patches of tarnish and wear catching the glow like old scars. He picked it up with a reverence usually reserved for sacred things, tested the reed with a light touch of his thumb, and brought it to his lips. The room didn't hush for him. No one dimmed the lights. There was no introduction, no polite applause. Jerome closed his eyes. Let the weight of the moment fall away. Let the doubts, the pain, the years of being invisible fall into the floor beneath him. All that mattered now was the breath in his chest, and what he could do with it. He started low. Single note. Deep, round, rich. The sound unfurled slowly like smoke rising from a long dormant fire. It curled through the tables, under the murmur of conversation, around the clinking of glasses. Another note, then another, building in layers, each one brushing against the next like careful brush strokes on an unfinished painting. A few people turned their heads. Conversations faltered, someone lowered their glass without realizing. Jerome played Whispers of the Broken Footpath, a song he had written in his mind 1,000 nights ago, when he lay staring at the cracked ceiling of a shelter, dreaming about the life he had lost. It was a song about the streets, about broken dreams and broken bodies, about hope that limped instead of ran but kept moving anyway. His fingers moved with a grace that belied the stiffness in his joints. The saxophone moaned and sighed, sometimes a low growl, sometimes a high, aching wail. The pain in his leg pulsed in rhythm with the music, a steady drumbeat he leaned into rather than fought. By the time he hit the final chorus, the room had gone completely still. Not a whisper, not a cough. Even the clink of ice against glass had fallen silent, as if the whole world was holding its breath. When the last note faded into the rafters, Jerome lowered the saxophone slowly, blinking against the bright overhead light. His chest heaved, sweat dampening his forehead. He looked out across the room, and for a moment, just a moment, no one moved. Then a single pair of hands clapped, sharp, loud, unapologetic. It was Noah, standing straight-backed by the bar, grinning from ear to ear. But. Another, and then the whole room erupted. Applause filled the space, rolling like thunder across marble floors and velvet curtains. People stood up, some cheering, some whistling, some looking around as if wondering how they had almost missed what had just happened. Jerome stood frozen, saxophone in hand, stunned. Roger Whitmore pushed his way through the crowd, his face unreadable at first, then slowly cracking into something Jerome hadn't seen before. Not pity, not obligation, respect. Roger reached the foot of the stage and looked up at him. That, he said, loud enough for the nearest dozen people to hear, was the most honest thing I've heard in a long time. Jerome, still panting lightly, gave a slight nod. Roger turned to the crowd and raised a hand for quiet. For those of you wondering, he said, voice strong, this man is Jerome Carter, and you better remember that name. The next few days passed in a whirlwind Jerome had never dared to imagine himself caught in. One moment he was clutching his old saxophone on a cheap stage, playing for strangers who barely knew his name. The next, he was sitting at a polished oak table inside the Willow Lounge, a thick envelope of paperwork in front of him, a pen heavy in his calloused hand, and Roger Whitmore leaning across with a smile that wasn't forced this time, but real. Roger had made it official. Jerome Carter would be the featured performer, opening the prestigious New Orleans Jazz Gala, an event that for decades had launched careers, filled magazine covers, and crowned the next generation of jazz royalty. But that wasn't all. Roger pulled strings, made calls, tapped connections that stretched from hospital administrators to tech companies. He arranged for Jerome to be fitted with a state-of-the-art orthopedic leg brace, the kind athletes use to come back after devastating injuries. Expensive, specialized, beyond anything Jerome could have dreamed of affording. It won't fix everything, the specialist had told him as they adjusted the brace to his damaged leg, fine-tuning the pressure points. But you'll move easier. Stand longer, play longer. For Jerome, that was enough. On the night of the gala, the streets of New Orleans glittered under 100 golden lights, and the Grand Plaza Theater shone like a beacon against the velvet dark sky. Black cars pulled up in sleek lines, spilling out men in sharp tuxedos and women in shimmering gowns. Photographers clicked and flashed, reporters called out names, and music floated on the warm night air like a promise. Backstage, Jerome stood facing a full-length mirror, adjusting the collar of a brand-new black suit that someone, he still didn't know who, had paid for. His reflection looked foreign, clean, pressed, standing almost straight with the new brace hidden neatly under tailored slacks. He touched the lapel with uncertain fingers, then picked up his saxophone, polished to a dull gold glow. Behind him, Roger appeared, his tux immaculate, his silver hair slicked back. Beside him, Noah bounced lightly on the balls of his feet, wearing a miniature suit of his own, a proud smile stretched across his face. "You ready, Jerome?" Roger asked, voice low but steady. Jerome tightened his grip on the saxophone. His heart was hammering, not from fear, but from something deeper, something he hadn't felt in years. Belonging. "I've been ready," Jerome said with a slow grin. "Just didn't know it." Rajin nodded, clapping a firm hand on his shoulder before stepping back. Noah gave a double thumbs up, practically vibrating with excitement. The stage manager called out, "2 minutes, Mr. Carter." Jerome turned to the curtain. Beyond it, he could hear the hum of 1,000 voices, the low clink of champagne glasses, the faint clearing of throats. They were waiting. Not for somebody famous, not for somebody already celebrated. They were waiting for him. The curtain lifted. Jerome limped out under the soft golden lights, the spotlight warming his skin, the stage floor firm beneath his feet. He crossed to center stage, heart pounding in rhythm with every step. He could see them now. The sea of faces, curious, expectant. Somewhere near the front he spotted Roger standing tall, Noah beside him practically glowing. Jerome lifted his saxophone. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The first note he played wasn't loud or showy. It was soft, pure. A whisper of a world too often overlooked. A world he had survived. A world that, for the first time, was finally listening. He played whispers of the broken footpath again, but this time it wasn't filled only with pain. It was filled with rebirth. Notes that soared and dipped, that cried and laughed in the same breath. His fingers danced, sure and quick, across the keys. His body swayed, steady and strong. Every note carried the weight of the streets he had walked, the nights he had slept under open skies, the battles he had fought in silence. And as he played, something extraordinary happened. The audience rose. Not at the end, not politely. Midway through the song, men in expensive suits, women in sparkling gowns, one by one they stood, hands clutched to their hearts or wiping at the corners of their eyes, completely captured by the raw, undeniable truth pouring from that battered saxophone. When the last note hung in the air, trembling like a heartbeat, Jerome lowered the saxophone and simply stood there, letting the silence stretch. He didn't need applause. He didn't need a standing ovation. He had already won the only thing that mattered, being heard. But the applause came anyway. It rolled across the theater like a tidal wave, wild, thunderous, relentless. It lifted him higher than any stage ever could. After the show, in the grand hall, as reporters clamored and flashbulbs exploded, a representative from Vanguard Records approached him with a contract offer. Jerome barely heard it. His eyes were locked on Noah, who ran up, breathless, and threw his arms around him. Roger stepped forward, his voice carrying over the noise. "We're establishing something new," he said, raising his glass. "The Jerome Carter Foundation. Scholarships. Training. Equipment for artists with disabilities. Nobody gets left behind because they walk different, or talk different, or dream different." The crowd roared. Jerome blinked hard against the sting in his eyes. Later, when a young journalist shoved a microphone in his face and asked, "What do you want to say to the world, Mr. Carter?" he didn't think long. He glanced at Noah, who stood beaming beside Roger, nodded once, and said simply, "That Kit you now heard me before the world ever did. Sometimes that's all it takes, one person to listen, before anyone else believes you're worth hearing." And with that, Jerome Carter smiled, not the tight, guarded smile he used to wear to survive, but a real, easy grin that split his face wide open as the world finally listened. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.